In this video, I'm going to be talking about a structured poster session titled Elementary Math Specialists' Use of Curricular Resources. All right, so this poster session is actually authored by myself. I'm Chris Ingledale. I'm an assistant professor of math education at New Mexico State University, and my colleagues Corey Webble at University of Missouri and Singhyun Yao at University of Alabama. So to get started, first of all, it's important to recognize that a coherent curriculum is vital to developing strong student knowledge construction. And we can look back to NCTM's Principles and Standards document for that, as well as many years of research in this area. And at the same time, we see many teachers basically being asked to be curriculum developers. And we have some nationally representative data that we can also draw on to understand how teachers are using curriculum as they're being asked to do these kinds of new, play these kinds of new roles, such as the Horizon study, which showed that most teachers have district required commercially published textbooks, and teachers use these textbooks at least once per week. In that same study, they also show about a third or fewer teachers being required to use digital materials, with about a third to a half of teachers reporting using any kind of digital materials. And this is from 2018, so it could be up from then. And the current study is examining patterns in teachers' curriculum use and the role of teacher expertise, which we have hypothesized would be associated with higher levels of perceived curriculum control. In the research questions, there are 3 of them. We go more in depth with all of this in our manuscript that I'll point you to later that has been published. But number 1, how do elementary teachers report their use of and satisfaction with digital and textbook resources for teaching mathematics? Number 2, what are the characteristics of profiles that distinguish patterns in how elementary teachers select, use, and rate mathematics curriculum resources? And then number 3, in what ways do EMS certified teachers differ from their peers in terms of their curriculum resource selection and use? So this comes from a larger study, and we incorporate here in this smaller version of it 25 grades 3 through 5 elementary math specialists matched with 31 of their peers at the same or a nearby school. And there are teachers from 28 schools ranging between 16 and 100% free reduced lunch, from 5 to 78% proficiency on the state test, and a school population of between 49 and 724 students. The data comes from a survey item that asked teachers to list the 5 major curriculum resources that students use in their classroom, and then to rate or note whether it's required, suggested, or neither, their satisfaction level with the resource, how frequently they modify the resource, and then the proportion of total class time that students use that resource. And that was required to sum to 100% across the 5 resources. Resources were then categorized as text or digital, and satisfaction and modification ratings were weighted by student use time as an overall rating across their materials. To analyze the data, of course, we have some descriptive statistics, but then we also used a method called latent class analysis, which is used to create profiles based on patterns in teachers' responses to the survey items. And then we dichotomized the variables to use them in latent class analysis. And the variables were first whether there was at least one text resource that was used, at least one digital resource that was used, the teacher was at least satisfied, was at least sometimes modifying, and used a single resource at least 75% of the time with students. In the end, we ended up using 2 latent class structure after examining fit statistics for 3 and also 4 classes. And then we also included whether a teacher was an EMS teacher or not as a covariate for the second research question. So to look at some of the results, so first you see the satisfaction and modification histograms on the left and right. or left and middle, or bar charts there. The pink color is digital textbooks or resources, and then the blue or teal is text resources. So you can see that teachers were largely satisfied regardless of what kind of resource it was. Um, and and then digital resources were seldom or never modified for the most part. Um, and that makes sense for a lot of resources that are not really easily modifiable. And then on the far right, you see there the proportion of time students use these resources. The top one is digital resources, the bottom one is text resources. So you see digital resources are not being used very often by students or for very much of the time. But text-based resources, there's a lot of variability in how those are being used. And thinking about the latent class analysis and what kind of profiles exist. So first of all, there are two classes, and we've described these two classes as non-digital and blended. The non-digital profile class is teachers who did not use a single digital resource. They didn't report using a single one. And the second class is teachers who used a mixture of digital and text resources. So if you look on the far left of this chart, that first data point there is indicating the proportion of teachers who said they were satisfied or very satisfied overall with their resources. And about a probability of about 70% for both groups. So they didn't really differ very much. They differed a little bit when you looked at whether or not they used at least one text resource. It was slightly less common for blended teachers to use more than one text-based resource. But they both used it pretty frequently. And then it differed a lot when we look at modification and using a single resource at least 75% of the time. So for the blended group, overall across all their materials, they're less likely to modify their resources. Where the non-digital group who only use text resources, about 60% likelihood of modifying a resource, at least sometimes. As opposed to less than 30% for the blended group. However, this comes with a caveat. If you disaggregate only the text-based resources from that blended group, then they are more equivalent to one another, with the blended group somewhere around around 58%, I believe. So very close to the non-digital group. And then they differ a lot the most when it comes to using a single resource. And this is because the teachers that are using digital resources are using more resources a total. So it's a lot more likely to see a teacher who only uses a text to be basically using a single text-based resource for the majority of student use time. I'm not going to look at this very deeply. There is a PDF link to this in the comments. But there are some interesting things to note here about which resources teachers were using that were digital resources and which were text based on which class they were in. Thinking about whether or not teacher expertise played a role in these two different groups and the way they use these materials, using EMS as a covariate in this LCA model did not show a statistically significant effect. So we couldn't say that that there is a different that EMS teachers were more likely to be in one group over another. However, teachers who were EMS certified were statistically significantly more likely to report higher levels of perceived control over the curriculum. And if we break that out by these two different classes, that remains true. Although we didn't run a statistical test once we broke it into these two groups because the numbers were too small. But on the left side, you see the blended group. The top box plot in teal is the non-EMS teachers, and the bottom box plot in the light pink is the EMS certified teachers. So you can see the EMS certified teachers, they are reporting higher amounts of curriculum control in both groups, regardless of whether they were in the blended or the non-digital class. Some takeaway points are, first, there's many digital materials that are in use, but non-digital texts still dominate. At the same time, in the blended class, we see that digital resources make up about 13% of instructional time. So although they're being used more often, they're not being used with a high frequency. Also in the blended class, non-digital texts account for 52% of instructional time on average. EMS teachers are more likely to perceive curriculum control even whenever it may not be warranted. And EMSs are more likely to use non-required or suggested materials than their peers. So this a question that I'll leave you with is who is and who should be selecting, filtering, requiring, and suggesting curriculum materials? And here is a link to the open access publication of this study, which was published in International Electronic Journal of Mathematics Education. Thank you.